My father-in-law and mother-in-law were village teachers in their youth. After retirement, they spent the first half-year idling at home, raising some chicks. Together, their monthly pension amounted to over 10,000 yuan, which was enough for their daily expenses in the countryside. However, my mother-in-law mentioned that she had never lived in the city during her lifetime. She discussed with my father-in-law about moving to the county town to enjoy their later years. My father-in-law, who had always prioritized my mother-in-law in everything they did together over the years, immediately agreed when his wife suggested moving to the city. Not long after, with the help of relatives, they bought a 60-square-meter second-hand house in the county town. After moving to the city, they spent their mornings playing mahjong at the mahjong parlor, rested well at home in the afternoon, and danced in the square at the park in the evening. Their days were as leisurely as could be. Just as the two elderly people were beginning to experience the tranquility of their later years, disaster struck suddenly. In the second year after moving to the city, my father-in-law and mother-in-law went to a nearby mall to buy clothes. While crossing the street, my mother-in-law couldn't dodge in time and was hit by a truck. She was rushed to the hospital and was in emergency care for over 2 hours, but unfortunately, they couldn't save her. My mother-in-law's unexpected passing dealt a huge blow to my father-in-law. He became utterly despondent, with a somewhat dazed expression. My father-in-law and mother-in-law had 3 sons. My husband is the eldest. He didn't study well when he was young, so now he can only rely on farming to make a living. The other 2 sons went to university and stayed in the provincial capital to work after graduation. The 3 brothers discussed that they couldn't let their elderly father continue living alone and decided to let him choose one of their homes to spend his later years. However, my father-in-law said, "I'll live by myself. I won't go to any of your homes." My father-in-law is a stubborn old man. When he heard that his 3 sons intended to bring him into their homes, he immediately got upset. My husband said, "Dad, if you live alone, no one will take care of you. As your sons, we can't feel at ease. Please choose one of our homes." My father-in-law replied, "I'm still relatively healthy. I won't go to any of your homes. If you can visit me during holidays, I'll be content." But my husband didn't give up. From time to time, he would drive back to his old home to visit his father, who was living alone. Whenever the father saw his son, he would wave him off, urging him, "Hurry up and go back. Don't waste your time. I have everything I need here. You all go about your own business." My husband would smile and say, "Dad, I'm just here to see you. If there's nothing else, I'll head back." Every time, my husband would bring some food for his father, but the old man would refuse to accept it, saying, "Take it back with you. I'm not short of food here." Later, the family discussed that this situation couldn't continue. My husband said, "Dad, our family is the poorest. Why don't you just come to live with us?" The other 2 brothers agreed, saying, "Yes, brother. You bring Dad to your place. We won't interfere." After some deliberation, the 3 brothers decided that since my husband lived in the same area as their father, with convenient transportation, it would be best for him to take care of the old man. Eventually, my father-in-law agreed, and so he moved to our home. However, the old man still had a stubborn streak. No matter what we did, he wasn't satisfied, and the atmosphere in the house became very oppressive. If it weren't for my husband's sake, I really wouldn't have wanted my father-in-law to live with us. Ever since my father-in-law moved in with us, he hasn't contributed a single penny. He even stopped paying the rent, water, electricity, and gas bills. The responsibility for household necessities like rice, oil, and salt fell on me. The old man ate his meals on time every day, went to bed on time at night, and didn't do anything around the house. He also had a particularly bad temper and wouldn't listen to anything my husband or I said. One time, my son brought a glass of water to my father-in-law and handed it to him, but the old man didn't even lift his eyes and said directly, I didn't ask you to pour water. Are you just being redundant? My son was stunned, not knowing what to do. Seeing my son's hurt expression made me feel incredibly sad. Later, my husband had a few talks with his father, but the old man remained the same, without any change. One day, a relative from the village came to our house and said that my father-in-law had given all the money from selling his house to his youngest son. However, to avoid affecting the youngest son's family life, he didn't let the other two brothers know about it. Hearing this from the relative, I couldn't stay calm. Later, I quietly asked my brother-in-law, and he admitted that he did indeed use my father-in-law's money to buy the house, but he promised to pay it back to my husband, not shortchanging him a single cent. I didn't tell my husband, thinking that the fewer people who knew about this, the better. But from that day on, my attitude towards my father-in-law changed, and I had an indescribable feeling in my heart. Noticing that I was becoming colder towards him, my father-in-law's attitude towards me became even worse. This awkward situation lasted for half a year. Later, my husband took our son out for a few days, leaving me alone with my father-in-law. However, he wasn't cooperative at all, which made me feel particularly uncomfortable. Later, I called my brother-in-law and asked him to take my father-in-law to his house for a few days and bring him back when my husband returned. My brother-in-law agreed and came the next day, but my father-in-law refused to leave. He insisted on waiting until my husband came back before he was willing to move. My brother-in-law had no choice but to leave. When my husband returned, I told him about this, and he didn't blame me. He just asked me to be more patient. Although my husband didn't say anything, I felt particularly uncomfortable, finding life at home too exhausting. One day, I had a heart-to-heart talk with my husband and shared my thoughts with him. I said, "Honey, I really don't want to live with your father anymore. How about I take the child and move out?" My husband's face darkened, and he didn't say anything, but the next day, he went to talk to my father-in-law. I don't know what they discussed, but a few days later, my father-in-law voluntarily said he wanted to go live with my brother-in-law. A huge weight was finally lifted off my chest. After my father-in-law moved out, the atmosphere at home became much more relaxed. Since then, my attitude toward my husband also changed. Sometimes, even if he did something slightly wrong, I would get very angry, feeling like nothing he did was right. My attitude toward him grew increasingly cold. Slowly, he also became less patient with me, and our relationship grew more and more tense. But one day, my husband suddenly said to me, "Wife, do you think this is beneficial to anyone? You always feel like others are wronging you, but you haven't done anything for me or our child. I don't find life very happy, and you don't seem to want me to be happy either." I was stunned and suddenly realized that my husband wasn't wrong. Ever since my father-in-law moved into our house, I had been harboring an inexplicable resentment, growing more and more dissatisfied with my husband. Now that my father-in-law had moved out, I was still dissatisfied with my husband. I began to reflect on myself, wondering if I was really the one in the wrong. Later, I tried to adjust my mindset and started to care more about my husband and our child. The relationship in our family gradually began to improve. Later, I found life to be much better than before. My husband became more considerate towards me, and the atmosphere at home returned to how it was when we first got married. Although we still argued, we would quickly make up afterward. The dissatisfaction and resentment in my heart gradually disappeared, and I began to feel that life was actually quite good. My father-in-law no longer treated me coldly either. Sometimes, he would even call to ask about how things were at home. I realized that life should be like this. We all need to care for each other and understand each other to live better. In truth, life isn't that big of a deal. As long as we're willing to let go of our stubbornness, stop worrying about gains and losses, and cherish the people in front of us, we will live happily.